Daniel Carter believed his life was simple and steady, the kind of life most people hoped for but rarely noticed while living it. He was 35, worked as an architect in Portland, and had built a quiet routine with his wife, Emily Carter. Their house stood on a peaceful street lined with tall maple trees, and every evening looked almost the same, Emily cooking in the kitchen while soft music played, Daniel reviewing building sketches at the dining table, and later both of them sitting together with coffee while a television show played in the background. Their marriage had once been full of excitement and late-night talks about dreams and future plans, but after 7 years the rhythm of life had softened those bright sparks into something calmer. They still respected each other deeply, yet there were moments when silence stayed longer than conversation. Daniel sometimes wondered when their laughter had become less frequent, but he never said anything because nothing felt truly wrong. One rainy Tuesday evening, Emily walked into the living room holding her phone with a small smile and said something that sounded ordinary but would soon change everything. She told Daniel that her twin sister Olivia Bennett was coming to stay with them for a few weeks. Olivia had recently ended a long relationship in Chicago and needed time to clear her mind before deciding what to do next. Daniel remembered Olivia clearly even though he had only seen her twice in the past. At their wedding years ago she had stood beside Emily, looking almost identical except for a brighter, more playful energy in her expression. The second time had been during a short holiday visit when she had filled the house with stories and laughter that made everyone feel relaxed. Daniel had always thought of her as friendly but distant from his daily life, someone connected to his world only through Emily. When the day of Olivia's arrival finally came, the sky over Portland was gray and cool, and Daniel returned home from work to find Emily already waiting at the door with excitement. A car pulled into the driveway minutes later, and Olivia stepped out carrying 2 suitcases and wearing a warm smile that instantly made the quiet house feel different. She hugged Emily tightly, then greeted Daniel with cheerful familiarity as if they had known each other for years instead of meeting only a few times. From the first evening the house felt more alive. Olivia spoke freely, joked about small things, and shared stories from her life in Chicago that made dinner feel less like a routine and more like an event. Daniel noticed how easily she filled the room with energy. Emily had always been calm and thoughtful, while Olivia seemed curious about everything, asking Daniel about his work and listening with real interest when he described his projects. Over the next few days their routine changed slightly. They cooked together, walked through the neighborhood after dinner, and sometimes stayed up late talking about travel, childhood memories, or funny family stories. Daniel began to realize how different the sisters were despite their identical faces. Emily brought stability and kindness to his life, while Olivia carried a spark that made ordinary moments feel exciting. One evening Emily received a sudden message from her office asking her to travel for 2 days to handle an urgent meeting with a client. She apologized for leaving so soon after Olivia arrived, but Olivia insisted it was fine and told her not to worry. When Emily left early the next morning, Daniel and Olivia found themselves alone in the house. Daniel planned to spend most of the day working from home, assuming the quiet would help him focus. Olivia spent the morning exploring the neighborhood and later returned with groceries and fresh coffee. By evening the rain had started again, tapping softly against the windows while a cool wind moved through the trees outside. Olivia suggested they sit in the living room with coffee because the weather made the house feel cozy. Daniel agreed without thinking much about it. They sat across from each other while the soft sound of rain filled the background. At first their conversation stayed light and friendly. Olivia spoke about growing up with Emily, about how people often confused them in school, and about how different their personalities had always been despite looking the same. Daniel laughed as she described funny childhood situations where teachers mixed up their names. Gradually the conversation became more personal. Olivia spoke about her recent breakup and admitted that ending the relationship had left her feeling uncertain about her future. Daniel listened carefully and offered quiet support, telling her that new beginnings often appeared after difficult endings. Olivia looked grateful for his calm words, and the way she listened made Daniel feel unexpectedly valued. Time passed quickly without either of them noticing. At one point Olivia looked at Daniel thoughtfully and said Emily had always spoken about him as someone dependable and kind. Daniel felt slightly embarrassed by the compliment and brushed it off with a modest smile, but inside he felt something unusual, a sense that someone truly saw him instead of simply sharing daily routines with him. The rain continued falling while the room remained softly lit by a single lamp. Olivia leaned back on the couch and spoke about how strange life could be, explaining that sometimes people met others at moments they never planned for. Daniel nodded politely, not realizing how meaningful the conversation was becoming. Then Olivia said something that made him pause for a second. She said Emily was lucky to have someone who listened the way he did. The words were simple, yet the tone behind them carried a quiet emotion Daniel couldn't ignore. For a brief moment their eyes met, and the air between them felt different, almost heavier. Daniel quickly looked away and took a sip of coffee, telling himself he was reading too much into a simple comment. But the feeling remained in the back of his mind as they continued talking. Later that night, when Daniel finally went to bed, he realized he had laughed more during that evening conversation than he had in weeks. The realization surprised him because he had never considered his life lacking anything. Yet something about Olivia's presence had stirred a sense of warmth and excitement he hadn't felt in a long time. The next day passed normally, but Daniel caught himself noticing small details he hadn't noticed before, like the way Olivia smiled when she told a story or how easily she turned quiet moments into engaging conversations. Nothing inappropriate happened, and both of them behaved respectfully, yet an unspoken awareness slowly grew beneath the surface. That evening they stepped outside onto the porch to watch the sunset after the rain stopped. The sky glowed with deep orange and purple colors while the air felt fresh and calm. Olivia leaned on the porch railing and spoke softly about how life sometimes changed direction without warning. Daniel listened quietly, unsure why her words felt so meaningful. She turned toward him and said sometimes unexpected feelings appear when people least expect them. Daniel felt a small wave of confusion because he didn't know exactly what she meant, but something in her voice made his heart beat slightly faster. In that silent moment Daniel realized the peaceful routine of his life had shifted in a way he never planned, and although nothing had happened yet, he sensed that the days ahead might bring emotions he had never prepared himself to face. The quiet moment Daniel Carter shared with Olivia Bennett on the porch did not lead to anything dramatic, yet the following days felt different in a way he could not easily explain. The house looked the same, the neighborhood stayed peaceful, and his routine with work continued as usual, but something inside his mind had shifted. Daniel kept reminding himself that Olivia was simply his wife's twin sister who was staying with them for a short time, and nothing about their situation should feel complicated. Still, he could not ignore the strange awareness that appeared whenever Olivia entered the room. The morning after that conversation on the porch, Daniel woke up early and walked into the kitchen expecting silence, but he found Olivia already there making coffee. Sunlight came through the window and lit the room softly. She smiled in a friendly way and greeted him like nothing unusual had happened. Daniel responded politely, telling himself the feeling in his chest was only the result of overthinking. They talked about small things like the weather and the bakery down the street while drinking coffee. Olivia mentioned she planned to explore the city during the day, and Daniel returned to his home office to finish an important design project. For a few hours he managed to concentrate, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the calm conversation they had shared the night before. He tried to focus on his work again and reminded himself that Emily would return home that evening after finishing her business trip. When Emily finally walked through the door later that night, the house instantly felt balanced again. She hugged Daniel warmly, thanked Olivia for keeping him company, and started talking about the meeting that had taken her out of town. Dinner felt comfortable and familiar. Emily spoke enthusiastically about her work plans while Olivia joked about getting lost in the city earlier that day. Daniel watched the sisters talk and laugh together, noticing how similar their voices sounded even though their personalities were so different. Emily was thoughtful and careful with her words, while Olivia spoke with lively energy. Everything appeared normal, yet Daniel occasionally caught Olivia looking at him for a brief second before turning back to the conversation. Those quick glances made him uneasy because he did not want to imagine meaning where there might be none. Over the next week life continued smoothly. The three of them sometimes watched movies together in the evening or cooked dinner while sharing stories. Emily seemed happy to have her sister nearby again, and Olivia appeared more relaxed than when she first arrived. Daniel tried to behave exactly the same as before, keeping conversations friendly and respectful, but deep down he knew something subtle had changed in how he perceived Olivia. One Saturday afternoon Emily decided to visit a friend across town for lunch. She invited Olivia to come along, but Olivia politely declined, saying she needed time to think about job options and update her resume. Daniel stayed home as well because he had sketches to complete for an upcoming project. For several hours the house remained quiet while Daniel worked at his desk. Around mid-afternoon he heard light footsteps in the hallway, and Olivia appeared at the doorway of his office. She looked calm but slightly thoughtful. Daniel greeted her casually and asked if everything was okay. Olivia stepped inside the room and sat in the chair across from him. For a moment she seemed unsure how to begin speaking. Then she asked a question that surprised him. She asked if he had ever felt like life had chosen a direction for him before he fully realized it. Daniel leaned back in his chair, considering the question carefully. He admitted that sometimes people follow routines so naturally that they forget to ask whether those routines truly reflect what they feel inside. Olivia nodded slowly, as if his answer confirmed something she had been thinking about. She spoke about how her life in Chicago had once seemed perfect but eventually began to feel empty. Ending her relationship had been painful, yet it also forced her to rethink what she really wanted from the future. Daniel listened quietly, offering supportive words when appropriate. As the conversation continued, Olivia spoke more openly about her feelings and her uncertainty about starting over. Then she said something unexpected. She told Daniel that when she first met him years ago at Emily's wedding, she had immediately thought he seemed like a rare kind of person, calm, honest, and kind in a way that made people feel comfortable. Daniel felt slightly awkward hearing that compliment because he had never thought of himself in such a special way. He replied politely that he was simply trying to be a good husband and live a decent life. Olivia smiled gently but did not argue with him. Instead she walked toward the window and looked outside at the quiet street. After a short silence she spoke again in a softer voice, saying that sometimes people meet someone who reminds them of what kindness feels like. Daniel felt his heart beat faster because the conversation was beginning to sound more personal than he expected. He stood up slowly, unsure how to respond without making things uncomfortable. Before he could say anything, Olivia turned toward him and explained that she respected Emily deeply and would never want to cause harm to their marriage. Hearing those words brought Daniel both relief and confusion. It meant Olivia understood the situation just as clearly as he did. Yet the fact that she felt the need to say it suggested that both of them were aware of a connection forming between them. The room fell silent for a moment while they stood a few steps apart. Daniel felt the weight of the moment pressing on his thoughts. He cared about Emily and valued the life they had built together, yet he could not deny that Olivia's honesty and warmth stirred emotions he had not expected. Just as the silence grew heavier, The sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the tension. Emily had returned home earlier than planned. Olivia stepped back immediately, smoothing her expression as if nothing unusual had happened. Daniel returned to his desk and pretended to review his sketches. A moment later, Emily walked through the front door with cheerful energy, greeting both of them with a smile and carrying a small bag of pastries she had bought on the way home. The house quickly filled with normal conversation again, but Daniel knew the quiet conversation in his office had changed something important. A line had not been crossed, yet the possibility of crossing it had suddenly become real. That evening, while sitting beside Emily on the couch, Daniel realized he was facing an emotional situation he had never expected. The real challenge now was not whether feelings existed, but whether he would allow those feelings to guide his choices or find the strength to protect the life he had promised to honor. After the quiet but intense conversation in Daniel's office, life inside the Carter house continued almost normally, yet Daniel Carter knew something inside him had changed in a way he could not ignore. He woke up the next morning determined to focus on his work and behave exactly as he always had, but the awareness of Olivia Bennet's presence stayed in the back of his mind like a quiet echo. At breakfast, Emily chatted happily about her schedule for the week while Olivia spoke about possible job opportunities she had started exploring online. Daniel listened and responded politely, trying to keep everything natural, but every once in a while he noticed Olivia glance at him briefly before turning her attention back to Emily. Those moments were short and subtle, yet they carried a silent understanding that made Daniel uneasy. He reminded himself again and again that his responsibility was to his wife and the life they had built together, but emotions were rarely as organized as logic. Over the following days, the three of them continued their routines. They cooked dinner together, watched television, and sometimes walked through the neighborhood park in the evenings. Emily seemed relaxed and happy to have her sister around again, and Olivia appeared more hopeful as she began applying for jobs in nearby cities. From the outside, the situation looked perfectly normal, yet Daniel felt as if he was standing between two different versions of himself. One part of him was the loyal husband who valued stability and honesty. The other part was a man who had unexpectedly discovered how deeply a simple conversation and genuine attention could affect his heart. One Friday evening, Emily suggested they all go out for dinner at a small restaurant near the river. The place was cozy with soft lights and quiet music playing in the background. Emily talked excitedly about a new project at work while Olivia told a humorous story from her years in Chicago. Daniel laughed along with them, but his thoughts were occasionally distracted by the quiet tension that still existed between him and Olivia. At one moment their eyes met across the table, and although neither of them said anything, Daniel felt a brief rush of emotion that reminded him how complicated the situation had become. He quickly returned his attention to Emily and the conversation, determined not to let his thoughts wander too far. A few days later, Emily left early one morning to spend the day visiting her parents outside the city. Daniel had planned to catch up on some unfinished design sketches at home, and Olivia decided to stay in as well because she had several job applications to complete. The house was quiet as Daniel worked in his office for most of the morning. Around midday, he walked into the kitchen to make coffee and found Olivia sitting at the table with her laptop closed in front of her. Sunlight streamed through the window, lighting the room with a calm warmth that made the moment feel peaceful. Olivia smiled softly when she saw him and said she had just received an email from one of the companies she had applied to. Daniel asked if it was good news. She nodded and told him she had been offered a position in Seattle. Daniel congratulated her sincerely because he knew how important a fresh start could be after a difficult chapter in life. Olivia seemed happy about the opportunity, yet there was also a thoughtful calmness in her voice when she explained that accepting the job would mean leaving Portland in about 2 weeks. Daniel felt a strange pause inside his chest when he heard that timeline. The idea of Olivia leaving should have brought him simple relief because it would remove the emotional complication that had quietly formed between them. Instead, he felt a mix of emotions he did not expect, including a quiet sadness that surprised him. They sat across from each other in silence for a moment while Daniel stirred his coffee slowly. Olivia finally spoke again and said she believed leaving was the right decision for many reasons. Daniel understood what she meant without needing an explanation. Their connection had grown stronger than either of them had planned, and distance would protect everyone involved from making choices that could damage relationships. Olivia stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street just as she had done the day she spoke with him in his office. She said softly that life sometimes placed people in unexpected situations that revealed feelings they never intended to discover. Daniel walked closer but kept a respectful distance because he knew how delicate the moment was. He told her that sometimes such situations were not meant to create problems but to teach people something important about themselves. Olivia turned toward him and asked what he had learned from the experience. Daniel paused before answering because the truth required honesty with himself. He admitted that the situation had shown him how easy it was for routines to slowly weaken the emotional connection inside a marriage. He said the feelings he had experienced had forced him to realize that he needed to pay more attention to the relationship he already had rather than searching for something new. Olivia listened quietly, and when he finished speaking she nodded with understanding. She said she respected that answer because it showed he valued loyalty and responsibility. In that moment the tension that had existed between them seemed to soften into mutual respect rather than temptation. Later that afternoon Emily returned home cheerful and full of energy, bringing stories about her family visit and asking Olivia about her job search. Olivia shared the news about the Seattle offer, and Emily immediately celebrated the opportunity, hugging her sister and saying she was proud of her courage to start a new chapter. Daniel watched the sisters smiling together and felt certain that Olivia's decision to move away was the best outcome for everyone. That evening while lying in bed beside Emily, Daniel stared quietly at the ceiling and reflected on the past weeks. He realized that the emotions he had felt toward Olivia were not simply about attraction but about the reminder that people sometimes forget to nurture the relationships already in their lives. The experience had revealed something important about himself and about the marriage he shared with Emily. Instead of allowing the situation to create distance, he decided it would become a reason to rebuild the closeness they once had. As he turned off the bedside lamp and settled beside his sleeping wife, Daniel knew the most important choice he could make was not about Olivia or the feelings that had briefly appeared, but about how he would protect and strengthen the life he had promised to share with Emily.